But by cutting waste like the ArriveCan app, the $35 billion infrastructure bank, the contracts to the McKinseys and the other consulting insiders, by rooting out waste and corruption, by finding ways to compress internal and back office budgets, we will get back to a balanced budget, and in so doing, we will lower inflation and lower interest rates. That will allow those hundreds of thousands, if not millions of families who will be renewing their mortgages to do so at a moderate rate in order to avoid the mass bankruptcies that I warned against earlier on today. This kind of common sense fiscal management is not foreign to Canadians. In fact, it was common across this country for a quarter century. From the mid-1990s until 2015, there was a consensus that government should balance the budget unless there was a recession or some major temporary crisis. This was a consensus, believe it or not, across all political parties, NDP provincial governments, Conservative and Liberals here in Ottawa, a consensus that was shattered by this Prime Minister whose radical leftist agenda took us into the permanent deficits, the permanent borrowing, the money printing that created the chaos that we have today. But what did that quarter-century consensus give us? It gave us a massive increase in our quality of life as Canadians. Housing became more affordable. Paychecks became more powerful. Taxes were much lower. The cost of the government went from 52% of GDP in 1993 to approximately 37% of GDP. That meant that Canadians had more money to make their own decisions, to raise their families, to start their businesses, to build the future. We developed the lowest debt in the entire G7 as a share of our GDP, something that we protected and something that allowed us to be a shock absorber against the crises of the 2008 recession and the COVID pandemic. All of that was enabled because governments accepted a common sense approach to balancing their budgets, to reducing debt as a share of the economy year after year. A Conservative government led by me as Prime Minister will re-establish that common sense consensus and make balanced budgets the norm and deficits the exception again. That will allow for our debt to decline, for our interest rates to be low, for our purchasing power to be maintained, or perhaps in some cases even grow.